Hey there, it's Pastor Landon and Kristen. We're the pastors here of Oasis Church. Thanks so much for checking out our YouTube page. We hope on this page you'll find content that stirs up a fire in your heart to go closer to God. Hey, stay up to date by the latest content by hitting the bell and the subscribe button here on this page.
If you live in the Eau Claire, Chippewa Valley area, we want to take a moment and personally invite you and your family to be with us this Sunday at either 9 or 11 a.m. No matter where you are in life, we'll make you feel right at home. Here at Oasis, our heart is to minister to the entire family, so you can be sure that your kids are going to experience a powerful time of ministry as well. You can plan your visit by clicking the link below, and we can't wait to meet you.
I can share some phenomenal stories that God has taken me literally around the world, but I want to share some of the earlier stories that built my faith to get me to where we're at. And I'm going to believe these stories, these seeds that God's going to allow me to share with you are seeds of faith, seeds of hope, seeds of healing, seeds of encouragement. And as I tell these stories, I want to let you know, take those seeds for yourself. Take them, say, I want that one. I want that one. God came to me in 2003 and he said, Chuck, you're going to go all over the world speaking. I said, about what? I'm not a preacher. I'm not a teacher. He said, no, it's your stories. I said, people want to hear stories? Your stories. And I'd never spoken anywhere at that point. 2004 came around. I got my first invite to go speak. And God gave me this word. It says, no preparation. I'll tell you what to say when you stand up. No Bible, no notes, no nothing. And it began 20 years ago. And so I want to just share these stories with you to encourage you and along the way. But really, the stories really begin at the beginning for my wife and I as we came together. As, you know, I grew up in a home, both my parents were alcoholics. And I believe a lot of people can relate to that of the alcohol just ravages many families. And I grew up, it was just normal. It's just, and with that, you know, I jumped right into it myself. Alcohol, drugs, partying. You know, my wife and I, we were really good at it. Yeah. And so when we got married, we met when we were 17 and met in 1976, 1979, we got married. Our wedding was just an extension of one of our parties. But the next day after our wedding, I got my very first prophetic word, and I wasn't even saved yet. My mother-in-law came to me, who was a mighty praying woman. And so we grew up Catholic. She was Catholic. And she came to Kathy and I after our wedding, after all that partying that we did. She came to us and she said, Chuck, God gave me a word for you last night at your wedding as I watched. And I said, well, really, what was that? He said, he told her, they shall lead them. And even though I wasn't saved, something jumped in me thinking, okay, yeah, I can, you know, I didn't know what to do with it, but I'm thinking it just stuck with me. 1980, about a year and a half later, we got saved. We invited Christ in our life and it really began the journey of walking with the Lord. And I remember reading the Bible for the very first time. Growing up Catholic, I knew all the stories, but I didn't have any relationship yet. I had lots of knowledge. But when I began to read the Bible for the very first time, it said in there, God's the same yesterday, today, and forever. I said, okay, God, if that's true, and if you are really real, then speak to me. I want dreams. I want visions. I want to see angels. I want burning bush experiences. Be careful what you ask for. I can tell you, I have experienced all of it. And so began the journey. And as I began to hear the voice of God, I remember one of my very first miracles was when I was 23 years old. My mom had gone into a coma. She was 45 years old. And the doctors had given her about a few days to live. And she's in a coma. And I'm 23 years old. And she's in the St. Cloud Hospital. And I remember my wife and I were going to go down and see her. And the Lord spoke to me. He said, Chuck, your mom's lived a hard life, but tell her this. Tell her it's not too late. And I want you to go pray with your mom to invite Christ in her life. I said, Lord, how can I do that? She's in a coma. As a sign to me, and you're going to hear this many times, I have asked God many times for signs. Is this really you? As a sign to me, if this is really you, then I need to see her come out of her coma. I need to see her say yes. So my wife and I went down to the St. Cloud Hospital, and here my mom, she's 4'11", weighs 75 pounds. Her insides are totally eaten away. And she'd been in a coma for a few days. They didn't give her much time to live. And I whispered in her ear. I said, Mom, wake up. And she opened her eyes. I said, Mom, God gave me a word for you. She said, you lived a hard life, but it's not too late. Would you be willing to pray and invite Christ in your life? And she said, yes. And I led her to the Lord. And I said, do you understand what you just did? And she said, yes. And she closed her eyes and went back into her coma and never came back out again. And a few days later, she passed away. But I remember this. It's a key word. Key word. As I walked out of her room, God spoke to me again. And he said, Chuck, because of your obedience, I promise you this now. I will give you all of your family. It took 17 years, but I led my father, my grandmother, 90 years old, my siblings, led them all to the Lord in God's time. So I was 23 years old at that time. At 25 years old, see, these stories are for the young and for the old, okay? And at 25, I was working at Levis Furniture, selling furniture. And God, and I get tricked into some things sometimes. Because God said, someday you're going to pray with a customer and you're going to lead them to me. I said, sure, I can do that, because it was someday. Never done that before. I didn't even know I could even do that. So I worked with lots of customers, lots of people. Then the someday came around 3 months later. As a stranger walks into the store, God says, this is the one. I knew what he meant. I said, no, I can't. I got a bad week going. I got on commissions. I can't do this. I've never done this before. And I got really anxious and really uncomfortable. And God was just real quiet. And as that guy approached me, it's still my number one prayer today yet. Okay, God, open the door. I'll do it. So this stranger comes in looking for a mattress. And I said, oh, and for one that we had on sale. And so I start walking this stranger down an aisle to show him this mattress. And all of a sudden, this stranger begins to tell me the struggles of his life. He's divorced. He's got custody of the kids. Life really stinks. He stopped. He said, why am I telling you all of this? I said, oh, I know why. God told me 3 months ago that somebody like you was going to come into the store. I was supposed to pray with you and to invite Christ to your life. Would you be willing to do that? Okay. That's how simple God has made it for me. And then something really important happened right after that. He bought the mattress. And God spoke to me again. He said, Chuck, I've just proven to you that you're going to be able to do ministry and prosper at the same time. And I've been living out that word that was 40 years ago. And I'm still living out that word today. See, I feel like God has mentored me in all that I do. I've been very blessed to have lots of friends come alongside and encourage us in our journey and speak into our lives. But through these stories, God began to teach me things. And so as life went along, working at Levis Furniture, I remember, when we got saved, this is really important. God spoke to Kathy and I when we got saved, and he said, a key word, he told us how many children we would have. And a key word, he said, you're going to have 4 to 5 children. And if you have all that I've asked you to have, I promise you I will provide. And we had our 5 children. But along the way, I remember going into Levis Furniture the day I was going to start. The Lord spoke to me and he said that you're here about 5 years. Now, this is the day I'm walking into the store where I'm going to start my new job. Okay, again, I hear a lot of different things, and I just file it away. Well, 5 years went by really quick, and I said, okay, Lord, where to? What's next? See, God always provided work for me. See, I have a high school education, no theological background. I'm just walking with the Lord. And I said, so 5 years comes by, I said, okay, Lord, where to next? And didn't hear anything. 3 months went by. Now I'm getting a little frustrated. Where to? What's going on? And he said this to me. He said, well, you never told me what you wanted. See, he always provided work. And I realized I finally grew up. See, as parents, we make all the choices for our children up to a certain point. Then we let them begin to make their own choices. And at about 30 years old, I finally grew up. And God said, tell me what you want. I thought, gosh, I never thought about it. You've always provided. So I remember going outside of Levis Furniture, out to the parking lot. I said, God, I don't know what I want to do. I never thought about it before. But the first thing that comes to me is I wanted to get into banking or the stock market. I don't qualify for either one. Never had that thought ever before, but that's what came to me. You choose. About 2 weeks later, a friend comes to me and says, hey, Chuck, I'm going to get into mortgage banking. I think you should come with me. And in my spirit said, yeah, I think I should. I called my wife, Kathy. I said, hey, I'm thinking about quitting my job and getting into mortgage banking. Well, whatever you think you should do. That was 1990. Began my journey into banking. Not easy, but the Lord led us into that. And then through this process, as I went along the way, there's so many stories in that process with it all, but one of the stories in the beginning of it is I worked for Sears Mortgage for a while. About 91, I came to work in Elk River at this bank, or not yet, but I was working for Sears Mortgage, and I was working at a home show. And the high school, you display your goods and advertising what you do. While I was sitting in there, God spoke to me about this bank and about these two people, Dwayne and Patsy, who I knew of, and they knew me, but I didn't know them. And the Lord said that they're going to want to talk to you, and they're going to want to hire you to come work for their bank. Now, I have not spoke to them yet, but that's what the Lord told me. And I didn't know if I liked that idea about working for them, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to get out of here. I packed up my box. I don't want to even talk to them. And I packed up all my goods. I'm going to avoid them. I'm going to get out of the school. And this is what happened. God intervenes. As I'm walking out of the school, Patsy is walking into the school. Oh, Chuck, how are you doing? Hey, Dwayne and I were just talking about it. We're wondering if you would be willing to come work for us at our bank. And he said, and then out of my mouth says, okay, I'll talk to you. And see, one of my prayers for myself is, Lord, never let anything come out of my mouth before it's time, but never let anything stay in it that needs to come out. And at times, God surprises me when things that come out. And so now I go sit with them, to interview with them. And so I went and prayed about it. I said, God, do you want me to go work at this bank? And immediately I see a dark cloud over this bank. I thought, oh, he's going to say no. And then he says yes. And so I said, why would you want me to go work at a bank that has a dark cloud over it? Because I'm going to show you I can bless you even in places of darkness. I want you to go. So off I go. Now, my interviews for my jobs are some of the strangest interviews, and I'll explain this one. I go in for an interview, and now I'm just a loan officer that's been in the business for about 1 year. And I'm going into an interview with the president of the bank, the vice president of the bank, executive vice president, CEO of the bank, and a manager. all of them want to interview me before they hired me. And I sit down, and a guy named Tom asks me, why would you want to come work for us? And here comes my mouth. I said, well, I prayed about it, and God spoke to me and said I was supposed to come work for you. And then my mouth kept on going. And this is what happened. I said, I want to let you know right now, God told me that I'm going to make more money than any of you. When I do, don't play with my commissions. I think we were all shocked what I just said. See, they're on salaries, I'm on commission, and I just gave them a prophetic word. I told Kathy before I got hired, see, at Levis Furniture back then, I thought I was doing really well, made $45,000 a year. And the Lord spoke to me, he said, I'm going to double your income. You're going to make $90,000 your first year there as a brand new loan officer. So to me, I thought, they're probably in there making $60,000, $70,000 back then. And I told them, don't play with my commissions. So they hired me. And that first year, at the end of the year, my first full year there, the president of the bank walks in and sits down at my desk. He said, Chuck, I just want to let you know, you made more money than any of us here. We've never paid anybody this much money ever. The bank is over 100 years old. And I'm thinking he's going to fire me. I think he's going to be jealous. And he said, congratulations. And then it happened again the next year. And I'm not going to get into the stories, but God began to show me different things that were going on that I knew how to pray for. But after 3 years of being there, Dwayne came to me and said, Chuck, I want to let you know that we're going to lower your commissions. And I said, oh no. See, what happened is they grew jealous. And I was getting basically a really basic commission. It was nothing high at all. But I just worked really hard and just did really well. And I said, let me pray about it. And I went back to them and I said, well, I came in praying, and I'm going to let you know I'm leaving praying. And they actually refused to give me my last paycheck. Oh, they came up and said, well, Chuck, you owe us for this and that and that. And I went home and told Kathy what happened, and told them that they're not even going to give me my last paycheck. And she said, you need to go back there and get that check. We need that. I said, I can't. The Lord told me that they're not my provider. He is. He said, don't worry about it. And then some of the strangers, but guess what? God opened another door and another door. And I remember Patsy came to me about a year later, and she said, Chuck, would you consider coming back and work for us? And I said, well, it was one of those moments again. I said, well, Patsy, I want to let you know that you don't have a very good reputation in town here. And I'll tell you what, I'll come back to work for the bank if you quit and everybody else, and I'll start all over again. And this is what she says, I would like to, but I can't, I'm too scared. I said, well, then I can't come back to work for you. But the thing is, the day I left the bank, God spoke to me, he said, Chuck, I want you, and he's pinpointed them, Dwayne and Patsy, he said, I want you to love them as if you were always working for them. Thinking, really? And here I'm in town, small town, Elk River, and I knew they were speaking against me. But every time I saw them, I hugged them, I loved on them, I would even drop off little cassettes of music for Patsy and just loved on them, even though I knew they were speaking against me. And then something shifted, and I left, and then I eventually left the bank, but I stayed in a relationship. But eventually, in 1995, I started working for a bank called Marquette Bank. And, well, actually, I back up a little bit. I was working for a bank, Norwest Bank, now which is eventually became Wells Fargo. And I remember Marquette Bank had called me and said, Chuck, would you consider coming working for us? I didn't know who they were. And I said, when they called and asked me to come work for them, I said, no, not interested. And about a month later, they called up and said, another person called up, a vice president, would you please come work for us? Would you come and interview? And just when I was going to tell him no, the Lord stopped me. He said, because I was going to tell him no. And he said, Lord, I said, did you ask me first? I want you to go work for them. Oh, yes, I'll come in for the interview. Here I come in for another interview. And I start telling him how I pray with customers, how I do different things. And it's like I warned him, but he wasn't listening to me. He said, but by the way, how much business do you do again, volume-wise? And I told him that we want you to come work for us. That was 1995. 1997, I get a call from the owner of Marquette Bank. And some of you might even know the name, Carl Pohlad. The Pohlad family that currently owns the Minnesota Twins. Carl Pohlad called me personally. Said, hey, Chuck, you're doing a loan for a family friend of mine, for his son, and I want you to reduce some of his closing costs. I said, I know who you're talking about, and I think I gave him a pretty good deal already. I don't think we need to do anything. He said, as a favor to me, would you do that? And I said, sure. I hung up the phone thinking, what a nice man that he would call. He could have called the bank president. He could have called my manager, but he called me. And I thought, you know what? The next day, I thought, I'm going to call him back. So Linda, his secretary, I talked to her. She puts me through. So I'm calling Carl Pohlad. Say, Mr. Pohlad, I want to let you know, I did that favor for you yesterday. And I've never had an opportunity to meet you. Can I have lunch with you? He said, sure, why not? Hung up the phone, and God spoke to me again. He said, Chuck, not only are you going to have lunch with him, but you're going to lead him to me. And I got all excited. It's like, yeah, I've been doing that for a long time now. I just, sure, that's just what's going to happen. And what happens is, it was a baseball strike going on at that time, 1997. And that lunch appointment got rescheduled and rescheduled and rescheduled. And we're about 6 months down the road now. I said, Lord, you told me, and I'm getting frustrated with God a little bit. You told me I was going to pray with him and lead him to you, Lord. And he said, and this is one of those learning moments, those teaching moments God gave me. He said, pray for his heart to be ready to receive me for when it's time. See, so many times we get so excited about our faith, we want to share it with everybody everywhere we go. But God's been teaching me, pray for the heart to be ready to receive me first. And then when it's time, I will open that door for you. And so as I began to pray for a man, I didn't know, the only thing I knew about him is my boss. He owned the Minnesota Twins, and he's one of the wealthiest guys in Minnesota and parts of the world. But that's all I knew about him. But I'm interceding for him. And then comes along, finally, a year later, his secretary says, okay, Chuck, finally, this is the date, October 20th, 1998. She said, this is the date we're going to do it. Okay. Now, prior to that, though, the Lord put on my heart to even pray for his wife, Eloise. And all of a sudden, the date comes. Now is the day. All of a sudden, just like the Levitt story, all of a sudden, I'm getting all anxious, all doubt. All those things are coming again, thinking, Lord, is this really going to happen? Are you really going to do this? How are you going to do this? And why do I even want to do this anyway? You know, I'm getting all anxious about all of it. And I tell my wife, Kathy, I said, you know what? I don't know what's going on. And I've been praying for his wife, and I'm getting ready to leave. And she said, well, here, I happen to make some banana nut bread this morning. And I think you should wrap it up and take it down and give it to his wife, Eloise. And thinking, that doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I think I'm supposed to. Okay. So she wraps it up in foil. And this is the real humbling part. The only bag we have, a gift bag that we have in the house, is a pink little bag. So we put this banana nut bread my wife just made in a pink little bag. I'm going to go see my boss. And I'm going to give him this pink little bag, thinking, Lord, this doesn't make any sense. But yeah, so I'm supposed to do this. And as I walk out the door, my wife says, now don't forget to pray. It's like, yes, Mom, here I go. And so off I go. But this is the cool thing, is as I'm driving down to go see Carl, God spoke to me and said, Chuck, not only are you going to pray with them, but you're going to become good friends with them, and you're going to pray many times with him. So God just took the word and even expanded it. He said, well, Lord, if that's true, then as a sign to me that I don't want to be visiting him, praying with him, and his staff thinks I'm going after it because of his wealth. So, Lord, give me favor with his staff then, too. So off I go. Carl's 83 years old. I'm down in Minneapolis at his headquarters. And he comes shuffling out of his office, and he's got a chauffeur there. He's got Linda there. He's got another secretary there. And they're all standing around. I'm meeting for the first time. We shake hands. He said, let's go. And I said, well, before we go anywhere, I have a gift for you, but not really for you, but it's for your wife, Eloise. And I hand him this pink little bag, and he said, what is it? I said, it's banana nut bread. He smiled and said, oh, that's her favorite. And Linda says, here, leave it with us. We'll make sure she gets most of it. See, the one thing is God's been teaching me also too, just be yourself. I don't have to try to be like anybody else. Just be who I am. And so we go off to this really exclusive Minneapolis restaurant. And as we're there, he whispers to the chauffeur, 45 minutes. So I knew we had 45 minutes for lunch. We get in there, and so we get our food. And I said, can I pray? And he said, sure. I get done praying. He says, I sure wish people would do that more often. So my wife's 2 for 2 now. This is a little funny part here. He sees on my plate I have beets. Now, beets to me are a decoration. It's not something you eat. Carl looks at my plate. He tells the waitress, hey, I want to have some of those beets like Chuck has. I said, Carl, you don't have to waste your money. Here, you can just have mine, pick up my plate, and shuffle my beets onto his plate. Just being myself, small town Melrose boy. But anyway, so Carl's telling me all of his stories about his life, and I'm telling him stories. And he tells me about a story about Sean Connery, the actor. And he was friends with Sean, how he'd go see Sean. And he said, I would go see Sean, and he'd come see me. And when I go see him, he'd expect me to buy. He said, he comes to see me, I buy. He should buy too. Then he tells me a story about Robert Schuller, the guy that built the Crystal Cathedral. He said, yeah, Robert keeps sending me these bookends, and I know what he wants. He wants me to put money toward that big glass building he's going to build. He said, I ain't going to give him any money for that thing. I said, Robert Schuller? Lord, hasn't Robert Schuller led him to you yet? And the Lord said, no, I saved him for you. He said, people would expect somebody like Robert Schuller or Billy Graham, but not somebody like you. I saved him for you. I said, but Lord, I can't do it here in the restaurant. This is not the place. And and the Lord said, ask to go back to his office then and tell him you want to pray with him about something. And Carl looked at his watch shortly after. He said, we've been there for an hour and a half now. He said, Chuck, I'm actually running late. I got to get back to another meeting. Hey, Carl, okay, can I come back with you to your office? I'd like to pray with you about something. Okay. And off we go. And we get to his office. He sits down. He said, okay, Chuck, what do you want to pray about? Okay, God. And I'm thinking, all right, God, I've been doing all the talking. Where are we going with this? And immediately God gave me a picture of myself at a church 2 weeks earlier. And in that service, I was worshiping the Lord, and my hands in the air, and my hands got hot. And I said, Lord, what are you doing? He said, I anoint you your hands for healing. I want you to begin to lay hands on people for healing. And that's what that thought came to me. I said, Carl, during lunch, you told me you had hip and knee problems. Could I lay hands on you and ask God to heal you? Sure. What do we do? I said, I don't know. I've never done this before. And so here I am. God sends me the very first person to pray for is my boss. And I said, Lord, what do I do? He said, well, get on your knees. So here I am on my knees in his office, laying hands on him. I'm telling you, I had no faith he's going to get healed. I'm just doing it because that's what came out of my mouth. So I lay hands on him, and he had hip and knee problems, prayed for him. God said, you're not done. So I stood up and said, Carl, I want to let you know that God didn't bring us together just to have lunch or even to heal you today. But if you were to die tonight, would you go to heaven? He said, oh, sure, I would. Oh, why is that? I'm Catholic. I said, Carl, I want to let you know, no denomination is going to get you to heaven. Catholic, Lutheran, Baptist. He said, well, what does? A personal relationship with Jesus Christ does. How do you get that? He said, would you be willing to pray with me? Okay. And we hold hands, and I lead him through this prayer and invite Christ in his life. And he gets done, and he said, Chuck, my mother has ailments. Could you come pray with her too? I said, wait, you're 83. How old is your mom? 103. She's living at home in nursing care yet. And he gets it. And that began our relationship. Months later, Carl calls me up. He said, Chuck, I want you to come down to my office. I need to talk to you. So I go down to see his office. He said, Chuck, 2 things happened in my office last time you were here. He said, first thing is I'll let you know I got healed that day. But I want also to let you know my life. He said, 5 years prior to you coming, for the last 5 years of my life, before you came to my office, I want to let you know I was a very unhappy man. But I want to let you know I'm happy today. And I want to invite you into my life. Would you teach me more about God? And thinking, oh my gosh, Lord. And I can tell you story after story. It was like a divine appointment when we got together. But Brandon had shared a story earlier about running. And I went down to see Carl. And Carl said, I had a vision for you yesterday. And I brought you a pair of running shoes. And he gave me the scripture, Hebrew 12, about running the race. And said, God gave me this vision of you. And I saw you running this race. And at the banner, though, before you passed under it, it didn't say finished. It said eternity. And you're running that race. And on 2 sides, I could see people cheering you on. One side and the other side. But one side was even yelling louder than the other to cheer you on. And it was the ones that didn't make it. They were telling you, run your race. And I bought him a brand new pair of running shoes, and I bought him a Bible. I said, Carl, this is a prophetic act. You're running a new race, and your Bible is your map book. It's going to give you the direction and how to get to that end of to your race because of you to get to eternity. And we began our story there. And with that, though, we began our phenomenal life and story. And I remember one time, I think it was about 7 years down the road, 2005, 7 years down the road, I told the Lord, I said, Lord, you know what? I've been praying with Carl all these years. I think I'm done. I think I've accomplished all I need to do. And I don't want people to think I'm calling on him because of his wealth. So I'm not going to call him anymore. I'm just going to be done. Now, it's not that the Lord told me I was done. I was telling the Lord, I think I'm done. Because I was thinking about what man was thinking of me, not what God was thinking of me. So I'm done. And as soon as I said I was done, the Lord said, call him up. I want you to go see him. I'm thinking, I just told you I was done, but okay. So I go off to see him. But now at this year, there's a light rail was coming through Minneapolis. And so I couldn't go into the parking ramp where his building was. So I had to park a few blocks away. And so then it's in February. And I'm walking through Minneapolis to get down to his office. And I get down there, and Linda said, he's not doing good today. Now, he's like 90 years old now. He goes to work every day. I asked Carl, why do you come to work? What else am I going to do? And I went to see him, and he's sitting in a recliner with a blanket over his lap. I said, Carl, what's wrong? He said, oh, my ankles and my feet, they're so sore I can't even stand. I said, can I pray for you? So I get on my knees, lay hands on him, pray for him. He stands up, and he gives me this long embrace. He said, Chuck, I need you. I said, Carl, we need each other, don't we? Yeah. I think I leave, think of the end of story. No. As I'm walking back to my car, I'm going through the streets of Minneapolis, and it's snowing out. And there's a gentleman sitting in a wheelchair panning for money. And as I approached him, the Lord said, stop and give him some money. So I stopped, gave him some money. He said, what you just did for Carl, do for him. Thinking, okay, I was in office, laying on my knees, praying for healing for him. So I asked this guy, could I pray for you? He said, well, are you a pastor? I said, no, I just got done praying for a friend of mine, and I just want to pray for you now. So I get on my knees in the streets of Minneapolis, and I begin to pray for this guy that's in a wheelchair. And all of a sudden, as I was praying for him, he starts screaming. He said, oh my God, who are you? I said, why? What's going on? He said, look at my hands. They're burning up. I couldn't open my hands before, but look at, who are you? And God spoke to me. He said, Chuck, I've just spoken to you. I've just proven to you, I'm no respecter of man, and neither are you. You just prayed for one of the wealthiest in the world. Moments later, I asked you to pray for one of the poorest. You're in the right relationship. Thinking, oh, Lord, thank you. You know, how he blesses me along the way in that journey. And then in 2000, I went to Carl. And I told Carl, Carl, you know what? I'm going to go start my own bank someday. See, what happened was I stayed in a relationship with Dwayne and Patsy along the way over the years. And Dwayne and Patsy came to me and said, hey, Chuck, we want to go start our own bank someday, and we want you to come with us. And I said, if you're willing to dedicate it to the Lord, I'll do it. See, if I would have came against them, that would have never happened. But I retained our relationship. And so I started working together with them, and we had to raise money to start our own bank. But since I had to go start my own bank, I had to leave Marquette Bank, and I went to Carl in 2000, and I said, Carl, I want to let you know that I'm going to give you my notice. I'm leaving Marquette Bank. But God told me to ask you for something before I leave. See, he said he's placed an anointing on your life to raise up banks and financial institutions. And he's asking me to ask you if you would bless me and impart that into my life. So I just told Carl, basically, I'm going to quit. I'm going to compete against you, but before I leave, bless me, okay? You don't do that normally, right? They would do that in their jobs when they leave? No. But God told me to ask him that. And he said, well, I've never done this before. What do I do? And I said, well, let's come up behind your desk. And every time we prayed, we always held hands. And he begins to pray. He said, Father, you've given me much. Now I release. And as soon as he said release, I could feel a physical electrical current flowing from him into me. I said, well, Lord, wait. He has 3 sons. Shouldn't they receive this? This is more than just a blessing. This is like a passing of a mantle. He said, no. They will receive the monetary blessing, but you're going to receive the anointing. Now be quiet and receive it. And I received it. So I thought, in a sense. And Carl and I, our relationship stayed together. And it was January 5th, 2009, I get an email from a friend saying, hey, Carl Polat just passed away. And God told me, receive it. He reminded me of that story I just told you. I said, well, didn't I receive it back then? He said, oh, no, it was promised to you. When do the sons receive their monetary blessing? Oh, it's when the father's taken up. When did Elisha receive his mantle from Elijah? Oh, when he was taken up. Now, receive it. And I received it. And God gave me this word. He said, Chuck, this mantle was created at the beginning of time. Knowing that it was going to be passed from man to man to man, to knowing that it was going to come to you. The others used it for themselves, but you will use it for the kingdom, and you will do greater with it than even they did. So he gave me that revelation. I tell Kathy that word. I, within 1 minute, get an email from a friend of mine. 1 minute later, Chuck, Lord, I was praying for you this morning, and God gave me a word for you. He said, there's a new mantle being passed to you. There's a mantle that belonged to another, but now belongs to you. It's not from man, but it comes from God. Doors that have been closed will now open. And I said, well, Lord, thank you. I received this. But this mantle reminds me of a father giving a son a really nice car, but there's no gas in it. So, Lord, I receive it. But until you put the gas in it, I can't operate in it. But I want to let you know, as I'm giving you those stories, those seeds, I encourage you, say, I want that, I want that. Because if God could use me, he can use anyone else here. Thank you, guys.